Read more! Play more! Chase life! Once more. It's time to talk about the complexity of crossed arms. For speakers, crossed arms is a weirdly controversial piece of body language, with some people saying you should never do it and others saying it's no real biggie. But of course, there's just a huge majority of people that just plain get it wrong when they try to decipher what crossed arms really means. So I'm going to quickly talk about the nuances to crossed arms, then address whether or not we as speakers should be doing it, and more importantly, what we need to look out for should our audience start to cross their arms. So without playing around, let's just jump straight in and address the very obvious defensive posture that crossed arms might represent. So of course, we've got this center line that runs from head to groin that we always want to protect when we feel threatened. So of course, crossed arms can suggest defensiveness or sense of vulnerability. But crossed arms can mean so much more than just being defensive. Crossed arms can indicate a sensation of coldness. And I see this a lot when I have a talk first thing in the morning. When my audience enters a big chilly auditorium on a winter's day, I can guarantee a lot of crossed arms as people try to warm themselves. For speakers, this can be a real issue as we'll have to compete with the distraction of the cold temperature for our audience attention, which no doubt is a pain. However, this will always be short-lived as the sheer weight of crowd of numbers will always rapidly heat up an auditorium, a theater, or whatever room you happen to be speaking in. Crossed arms can also be a sign of what we call self-stimulating or self-soothing. And we see this a lot when someone's caught in a daydream and we see them looking away and perhaps stroking the back of their arms. They're self-stimulating and relaxing themselves. And for us speakers, while this form of crossed arms isn't a hostile sign, it does indicate that we've lost a listener. Clearly, they've drawn inwards, so instead of listening to us, they're lost in their own world. And if I see this, I might incorporate a clap or a brief increase in my voice or an abrupt change of stage direction to bring my lost listener back. And again, this form of crossed arms is no biggie. But if you do see a growing number of people doing it, that's an indication that people are neither being entertained or informed by your speech, in which case you need to work on incorporating some excitement and passion into your delivery. Partial crossed arms with ear touching or lip stroking can be an indication of arousal. And yeah, that means you're hot, you got a little mojo. Unfortunately though, this isn't something that we want, at least not while we're talking or on stage. If someone finds you outrageously attractive, then they're concentrating on your physicality instead of your message. And if you constantly see this when you talk, then you need to check your dress sense and consider covering up a bit more. And yeah, I do appreciate, I know that this sounds super boring and super conservative, but you got to stay flirting for any time other than when you're up on stage. Sure, dress funky. Sure, apply your personality, but don't overly advertise sexuality. I'll say it again. You want people focusing not on you, but on the words and the message coming out of your mouth. Crossed arms can also indicate hyperconfidence and preparedness, and you'll often see these in athletes waiting at the lines before a competition or in cocky fighters facing off to someone they consider an inferior opponent. Crossed arms with finger to lips can be an indicator that someone doesn't like your words. However, the same body posture, but head tilted back and eyes looking up to the ceiling can be an indication that someone is mulling over and digesting your words. So while the first might not be a good sign, the second certainly isn't bad. It is in fact an indicator that someone is really applying thought to your words, which as a speaker is something that we always want. Confused? Look, don't be. When we deal with body language, we don't look at a single body part or single piece of physical expression. Instead, we look at the whole. You don't need a PhD to unlock hidden meanings in body language. As humans, we're just instinctively good at it. We can tell at a glance, no, in fact, we can feel at a glance if our message is going over well or not to our audience. Having said that, there are some obvious pointers that we need to address. Namely, what crossed arms in us as a speaker might look like to our audience, and more vitally, more importantly, what crossed arms in our audience can tell us about our delivery. So while crossed arms can mean a whole range of things, for us as speakers, it's important that we try to avoid crossing our arms while delivering a speech, particularly if you don't yet have a natural confidence. And don't worry about confidence, that will grow with the frequency of your talks. Remember though, we always want to look and appear confident so that people will have confidence in our words, in our message, and in our speech. And while we as speakers might have a good understanding of body language, perhaps our audience might not. So let's avoid the pitfall of appearing insecure. Let's avoid the crossing of arms and instead focus on expressive arm gestures where our elbows flare away from our body. If you must or do choose to cross your arms, turn it into a positive, confident piece of body language by lifting our chest, our chin, and reinforcing this with a smile. If you do see one or two members of your audience crossing their arms, then don't worry. You need to consider the crowd as a whole and in its entirety. However, if you do notice ever-increasing numbers of your audience crossing their arms, combined with negative facial expressions, which is the grumpy sort, then you need to give some consideration to the content and the delivery of your speech. And if in doubt, pull aside one or two members of your audience after the talk and ask for some honest, genuine feedback and adjust your talk thereafter if you need to. So after all that information, do I cross my arms when I speak? Well, yes and no. I never cross my arms during the main meat of my talk. I do, however, have a tendency to cross my arms during Q&A sessions while waiting for an audience member to ask a question. To combat my crossed arms and the fact that I have an embarrassing ability to look a little bit like an ogre, I ensure that I have a big fat smile on my face so that audience members can continue to feel both included and welcome. And at the same time, I'll plant my legs in a wide stance to underline my confidence. The smile and the wide stance changes the composition of my crossed arms from a negative one to an inclusive one. As ever, my peeps, I hope this small insight is of some help. And with that, I'm out of here.
Public speaking can be daunting. Make it easier with the Public Speaking Bible, a survival guide for standing on stage. This gem of a book contains a whopping 300 years of accumulated tips and knowledge from Marcus and other expert speakers. Insights include pricing your speech, projecting your voice, body language, crowd control, memorizing a speech, overcoming stage fright, and more. Whatever your profession, if you need your voice to further your career, this book deserves a place in your library.